The 454 LS6 should have won. Every magazine said so. GM's own engineers called it unstoppable. It didn't. And the NHRA made sure that result stayed buried for 2 decades. This is the 446 pack against the 454 LS6 Chevelle. One race, one winner, no debate. We have the dyno sheets, we have the time slips, and we have the one fact GM's PR department never wanted printed. Let's go back to 1970. The horsepower war was not a metaphor. It was a documented arms race with a body count. Detroit's Big Three were spending real engineering money to beat each other at the stoplight and the drag strip. GM had a corporate policy. No engine over 400 cubic inches in a mid-size car. Someone at Chevrolet ignored it. They dropped a 454 into the Chevelle anyway, and they rated it at 450 horsepower. Gross. Chrysler had their own answer. The 446 pack. 3 2-barrel Holley carburetors on a single manifold. 390 horsepower rated. 390 horses. That's what the factory claimed. Hot Rod Magazine's own dyno put it closer to 420. Chrysler knew. They just filed the paperwork low to keep the insurance companies off their customers' backs. That right there is the whole story of 1970 muscle cars in one sentence. The real numbers were always bigger than the official numbers. Now let's build the case for the 446 pack, because this engine did not get the respect it earned. The 440 cubic inch B-Series block was not new in 1970. Chrysler had been running it since 1966. But the 6-pack package, that was a 1969 invention, and it was built specifically to beat the 428 Cobra Jet Ford. 3 Holley 352 barrels on an Edelbrock-designed aluminum intake. The center carb handled cruising. The outer 2 opened only under full throttle. Total airflow at wide-open throttle, 1,050 CFM. For a street engine in 1970, that number was almost violent. The heads were the same open-chamber 906 castings Chrysler used on the regular 440, but the compression ratio on the 6-pack was 10.5 to 1. You needed 100-octane premium to run it right. Most guys just found the nearest Sunoco 260 pump and topped it off. Torque was 490 pound-feet at 3,200 RPM. That low RPM grunt is what made the 6-pack dangerous on a real street race, not just a prepared strip. Car and Driver ran a 1970 Roadrunner with the 446 pack. Quarter mile, 13.54 seconds at 105 miles per hour. Stock tires, street fuel. That time made it one of the 5 quickest street-legal cars tested by any major magazine that year. Now the Chevelle. Because the LS6 is not a car you dismiss. It is a car you respect and then explain why it's still lost. The LS6 was a special order option, RPO code LS6. You could not walk into a dealer and demand one off the lot. You had to know it existed. You had to specifically check that box, and it added $263 to the sticker price. That is less than the price of a decent set of tires today. For 450 horsepower from the factory, the LS6 block was a new casting. 4-bolt mains, forged steel crankshaft, forged aluminum pistons. This was not a parts bin engine. Compression, 1125 to 1. That is higher than the 6-pack, higher than almost anything GM put in a production car before or since. The LS6 heads were rectangular port units, the same basic casting used in Z28 race development, with 2.19-inch intake valves. A single Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel on top versus the 6-pack's 1050 CFM. That gap matters. We will come back to it. GM rated the LS6 at 450 gross horsepower. Motor Trend's independent dyno session got 461 at the flywheel. At the rear wheels, which is what actually turns the tires, independent testers measured 390 to 400 horsepower. Drivetrain loss was brutal in those A-body cars. The turbo hydromatic 400 automatic behind the LS6 absorbed roughly 50 to 55 horsepower in parasitic loss every single time. The Chevelle, tested by Car and Driver in 1970, ran 13.81 seconds at 103.8 miles per hour with the TH400 automatic. 1381 at 103. Write that down. We are going to compare it to the six-pack's number in about 60 seconds. Now, this is where the institutional angle gets real, because the LS6 didn't just beat the competition on paper, it scared people in suits. By 1971, one model year after the LS6 launched, GM dropped its compression ratio to 8.5 to 1 and slashed the rating to 365 horsepower. They did not do that because of emissions regulations alone. The insurance industry had been lobbying hard, and GM's legal team was getting nervous about liability. The most powerful production engine General Motors ever installed in a mid-size car existed for exactly one model year, 1970 only. 4,475 LS6 Chevelle were built. That's it, out of over 300,000 Chevelle SS units that year. Now compare that to the 446 pack. Chrysler built 15,804 cars with it in 1970 across Roadrunner, Super B, and GTX models. Chrysler was not hiding the six-pack. They were selling it to anybody who walked in with a down payment. That is the first philosophical difference between these two cars. The LS6 was an insider secret. The six-pack was a democratic weapon. Now let's actually race them. Here is what the data says when conditions are equalized. Both cars tested with automatic transmissions by independent magazines in the same year, 1970. 446 pack Roadrunner, 1354 at 105.5 mph, 454 LS6 Chevelle, 1381 at 103.8 mph. That is 0.27 seconds. On a drag strip, 0.27 seconds is not close. That is a car length. The six-pack also posted a higher trap speed, 105.5 versus 103.8. That tells you it was still pulling hard through the traps. The Chevelle was running out of breath. Why? That CFM gap we mentioned. At high RPM, the six-pack's 1050 CFM was still feeding the engine. The LS6's single 780 CFM carb was starving. The LS6 had the better compression, the better bottom-end rotating assembly, but Chevrolet throttled its own engine with an undersized carburetor. That was a deliberate decision. A larger carb would have pushed the LS6 over 475 horsepower. GM's management would not sign off on it. So the most powerful GM production engine in history was intentionally detuned at the carburetor, and it still couldn't beat the six-pack. Now some will argue, what about weight? The Chevelle SS was heavier. Fair point. Let's run those numbers. 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 with Teach 400, 3,834 pounds. 1970 Roadrunner 446 pack with Torque-A-Flight 727, 3,775 pounds. 59 pounds. That is the weight difference. About what 3 full gas cans weigh. It is a factor, not an excuse. Power to weight. The six-pack Roadrunner ran 9.94 pounds per horsepower at the rated figure. The LS6 Chevelle ran 8.52. On paper, the Chevelle wins that fight. And yet the six-pack posted the faster time slip. Because power to weight calculated from gross horsepower is a fiction. The drag strip does not care about your press release. The Torque-Flight 727 in the Roadrunner was also a better transmission for drag racing than the TH400. Shorter first gear ratio, 2.45 versus 2.48, and it shifted harder. The Roadrunner also launched with less wheel spin because Chrysler's standard rear axle gearing that year was 3.55. The Chevelle most frequently tested with 331. Every single variable, carburation, gearing, launch control, went Mopar's way. The LS6 was a better engine in a worse package. That is the verdict. Say it plainly, the 446 pack beat the 454 LS6 in every independently documented street-legal drag test conducted in 1970. Not once, every time. Now here is where the legacy gets complicated, because the LS6 that never reached its potential became the most desirable GM muscle car ever built. A numbers-matching 1970 LS6 Chevelle with the 4-speed manual sold at Barrett-Jackson Scottsdale in 2022 for $770,000. $770,000 for a car that lost the drag race it was built to win. Numbers-matching six-pack Roadrunners are not not cheap either. Documented examples with the Dana 60 rear and broadcast sheet have crossed $200,000 at auction in the last 4 years. The rarity gap drives the price gap. 4,475 LS6s versus 15,804 six-pack cars. Simple supply and demand. But here is what matters for the historical record. After 1970, neither car came back in this form. The era ended with these two engines still fighting. By 1972, GM had switched to net horsepower ratings. The LS6's successor, the LS5, rated at 270 net. The six-pack was gone from the lineup entirely after 1971. The insurance industry won. The lawyers won, and a generation of engineers who had built the fastest street cars in American history got told to stand down. That is the real story behind both of these cars. They were not just fast, they were the last fully committed factory weapons before the suits took over. And one of them won the fight. That was Chrysler, with less displacement, less compression, and a carb setup that cost about $40 in 1970. If you had a choice between these two cars today, not to sell, to drive, you'd be lying if you said you didn't think about it for at least 5 seconds. The LS6 gives you the forbidden history, the car GM killed before anyone could actually beat it properly. That has its own gravity. But the six-pack, that is the car that showed up, beat the favorite, and never got the headline. And the drag strip has the receipts. Tell me in the comments, which one are you taking home? The banned Chevelle or the six-pack that beat it? And if you have run either of these cars, I want the time slip. Subscribe for the next verdict. We settle these every week with the same data the manufacturers hoped you'd never find.